Hi, I'm using a throwaway account because I have a lot of people added to my main account. So I'm in a bit of a pickle right now because of something that happened a few days ago and my husband has stopped speaking to me because of what I said. For context, my husband, I'll refer to him as Frank, and I have been married for 3 years. He's 33 and I'm 30. We dated for 2 years before that. This is my first marriage, but my husband has been married before. Interestingly enough, his ex-wife is still a part of his life because my mother-in-law is pretty much a demonic creature and hates me because she thinks that I'm the one who took away her son from her dear little daughter-in-law. Or maybe I should say, ex-daughter-in-law, which is something that she is still mad about. My husband's ex-wife, we will refer to her as Sandra, was his high school sweetheart. She moved in next door with her family when he was in high school, and since they spent a lot of time together, they ended up falling in love. They dated for a couple of years and after both of them had graduated from college, they decided to get married. They had even attended the same college because they couldn't bear the thought of being apart. After they got married, they had one good year before things started falling apart for them. Sandra had chosen to be a stay-at-home wife, but unfortunately, Frank had just started working, and he wasn't earning enough to support both of them and pay all the bills. But Sandra was determined to be a stay-at-home wife because she thought that it was a better lifestyle for her. The problem was that there wasn't much to do around the house, so Frank would tell her that she was just wasting her time and his money, so she needed to start looking for a job. That's how the fighting started, and then, instead of trying to fix things between them, my mother-in-law, let's call her Karen, decided to make things even worse for him. She planted the idea that having a baby would solve all their problems in Sandra's head, and that stupid woman actually believed her. She started insisting that they have a child so that it would solve all their problems and they could return to their state of marital bliss. But of course, Frank, like any other normal person, was against that idea. Because for starters, they barely had enough money to cover their own expenses. A child would just make matters worse for them financially. They could simply not afford to have a kid at that time. And secondly, he was still relatively young and hadn't even hit 25 yet. He hadn't thought about having kids before that age because let alone financially, he wasn't even mentally or emotionally prepared to have a baby. But since Karen had already planted that idea in Sandra's head, there was no taking it back. She became obsessed with the idea of having a child and she started accusing Frank of not loving her enough to have a baby with her because he didn't agree with her idea. Things only got worse, beyond that point, and eventually, Frank just cracked under pressure and filed for a divorce one day. They had already been fighting that week, and he said that he just couldn't take it anymore, so getting a divorce was the only solution. After that, it was the usual. There was a lot of drama and Karen was fully on Sandra's side. A lot of meaningless and false accusations were thrown around, where people were implying that maybe Frank had been having an affair and was simply trying to hide it. It was really hurtful because most of it came from his own mother, but eventually, they were able to work past their differences and continue to remain on good terms. Sandra also mellowed down considerably after the divorce had been filed and a lot of years were shared and she promised to change into a better woman for him eventually. But they did go through with the divorce because Frank wanted to give himself a real shot at being happy. So he continued to live in the apartment that he had been staying in, and Sandra moved back in with her parents. Sandra and Karen continued to remain on good terms and somehow, got even closer after the divorce because they lived in close proximity and would meet and talk to each other almost every day. While Frank continued to work on himself, and eventually, he landed a job in the company that I was working in. By the time I met him, he had already been divorced for a couple of years. I met Frank for the first time on his first day of work and that would be around 2.5 years ago. He sat at the desk opposite to mine and we weren't friends for the first few months. But then he struck up a conversation with me one day and we ended up becoming really good friends. Then he asked me out and I said yes. Since then we have been together and things were smooth sailing at first. I always knew for a fact that his mother was never going to like me. He had told me that she had some weird unresolved issues and had told me how she treated Sandra better than she treated him, which was given that he was her biological son, and she was just her daughter-in-law. He had told me everything about his first marriage and how it fell apart and I empathized with him. I thought that it was really sad and even before I'd met his mother, I prepared myself mentally and I knew that she was not going to like me because she was apparently still holding out hope that Frank would go back to Sandra. And I was standing in the way of that, at least that's what she thought. So I had no expectations the first time that I met my husband's family. His father and his sister were relatively nice, but just like I had expected, Karen was cold, and she didn't even try to hide the fact that she wasn't on board with this relationship. Even though Frank had taken his time and hadn't introduced me to his family until we had completed almost 10 months of our relationship. His mother had known that he was dating me, but even then, when she met me, she made it very clear that I would never be welcome in the family. And to be very honest, I didn't really care for it. As long as Frank was on my side, I didn't care what his mother thought of me. Especially given the fact that I knew and was aware of a weird equation with her ex-daughter-in-law. I thought being in a position where she didn't like me, would be still better than being the second Sandra or whatever. So, anyway, I knew about his first marriage and his mother's relationship with Sandra. I had also known about how in love the two of them had been in the initial stages of their relationship. I didn't think that, at any point, they could do anything to shock me even further. But then, after the first time that my husband introduced me to his family and brought me home, Sandra and Karen decided to team up against me. So after that, every family event that I would attend as Frank's girlfriend, Karen would make sure to invite Sandra because she was part of the family. I knew that they were just trying to get into my head and were waiting to see how long I waited before I cracked and threw a fit about Sandra being present at the family parties and gatherings, but little did they know that I had already prepared myself for this and I wasn't going to let it bother me. As long as they were not actively getting in my way, I didn't care. I knew that they were trying to play mind games with me, but I wanted to know that I wasn't the kind of woman that they could just intimidate and get rid of. So for the years that I was dating, Frank and Sandra would be present everywhere and he and I would just ignore her and would even laugh about it once we got home because we knew that this was not the reaction that either of them had expected. This went on until we got married, and neither of them ever had the courage to actually come up to me and say anything. They would just stand in corners and lurk while shooting nasty looks at me and Frank, just because we were not playing into their hands and giving them the reaction or the outburst that they wanted. Then, Frank and I got engaged, and even after that, things were pretty great for us. It only started getting bad once we actually got married. Of course, Sandra was not invited to either the engagement party or the wedding because Karen was not in charge of the guest list there. But after marriage, most of the events and holidays were held at Karen's house. Be it Thanksgiving or Christmas or birthdays and anniversaries, Sandra was always invited. After our marriage, however, instead of just glaring at us from a distance, they started actively picking on me. It started off small and insignificant. They would just maybe make a remark or make some backhanded compliment about something that I was wearing or the way that I had done my makeup. And then they would erupt into giggles like a bunch of high school girls. That was pretty easy to ignore because it really didn't make a difference to me if they didn't like the way that I dressed or the way that I did my makeup. Their opinions on anything didn't matter to me, so it was very easy for me to ignore them at first. But then, they started getting bolder with their insults. They would say things to imply that maybe Frank had made a mistake by marrying me because now, he would have to get used to doing household work on his own because I would never have the time. I had been promoted over Frank a couple of months ago, and that's what they were making fun of, trying to emasculate my husband, saying things like they knew that I wore the pants in the family. It was orthodox and narrow-minded of them, but I didn't expect any better from them either. They would also say certain things like Frank had screwed up by letting go of Sandra because at least she would have made sure that they had a family of their own by the time he was in his mid-30s. But unfortunately, I would never be able to give him that, because apparently, I was too old to have kids now. Honestly, I don't even think that's true because I've heard of plenty of women who have successfully and easily given birth after 30 and sometimes, even after 35. They would bully me for the strangest things, and even though I would try really hard not to let their words get under my skin, it was becoming more and more difficult to let things slide since they were getting worse. Not only were they making fun of my appearance, but they would also mock things that were out of my control as well, like me getting promoted over Frank, and the way that I had not been raised well enough to know anything about being a good wife, and that Frank had really lost by letting go of Sandra. They would say all this right to my face and Frank never said anything about it. Earlier, when Karen would invite Sandra to all the family events, it would never bother me because they would never actually say anything, and I knew that whatever games they were trying to play with us, we were winning it. So before we got married, it had never bothered me, and for a couple of months, even post-marriage, it didn't get under my skin, the way it used to after that. But after one point, it was just too much to take, and I had reached a saturation point with all of this. So last year, towards the end of the year after we had our Christmas dinner at Karen's house, I decided to have a talk with Frank regarding his mother's behavior. I knew that the way Sandra behaved was out of his control, so there was no point in talking to him about that and I didn't even blame him for it. But the one thing that he could do was talk to his mother and tell her that he didn't appreciate the way that the two of them were treating me. I knew that cutting her off was not going to be possible because cutting her out of our lives would mean that he would never be able to visit his father again. And his dad was a nice man, but due to unfortunate circumstances, he was wheelchair bound and he needed Karen to take care of him full time. We could move him in with us, and we had even suggested that a couple of times, but his father preferred to stay with Karen, for obvious reasons. She might not be a great mother, but she was a good wife. So cutting Karen off was not even on the table. The only thing that I could expect Frank to do was promise me that he would talk to her and tell her to lay off me. Last Christmas, Karen and Sandra had given me an especially hard time and had been pretty much at their worst. They had made a lot of comments about our marriage, which was apparently doomed to failure according to them, and had been making several distasteful jokes about how I had better hold on to Frank if I didn't want him to go back to Sandra. It had made everybody at the table uncomfortable and had annoyed me to no end. So that day, I decided that I was finally going to talk to Frank and tell him to put an end to this. I could have said something for myself, but all my life, I have been told that I have a tendency to take things too far, and even as a child, sometimes I would say hurtful things during fights and stuff. So I didn't want to say anything that would ruin Frank's relationship with his mother, because then, that would also ruin his relationship with his father, and I didn't want to be held responsible for that. And that is why, so far, I had kept my cool and not dignified any of their jibes at me with a response. But after that day, I had had enough, and somebody needed to put an end to this. I had expected Frank to stand up for me and say something, but when he hadn't done it on his own, I thought that I could just nudge him in the right direction, and he would tell his mother to lay off. But when I sat him down to talk to him about this, he didn't even try to entertain the discussion and said that he was not interested in getting caught up in family drama. To be completely fair, I didn't think this was just family drama or even drama at all. Because this was actually getting on my nerves now and they were insulting me, so as my husband, he should have at least tried to intervene and I shouldn't have even had to talk to him about this. But he brought up a bunch of things and said that he had believed that I was an independent woman, and I was capable of fighting my own battles, which is why he had nothing to say. He told me that if I wanted somebody to defend me, then I would just have to do it myself. I thought that was really condescending, and I remember telling him that day that I didn't have a problem with defending myself and standing up to them, but then, it could quite possibly ruin his relationship with his mother and then he would never get to see his dad again. So he said that I could just choose not to attend these family gatherings, but even that was not an option because I didn't want to come off as a coward. And when I said that, the next time Sandra and Karen picked on me and made unwelcome remarks about me, I would just hit back at them. But as an afterthought, Frank told me not to do that, probably because he didn't like the sound of me taking things too far and he was scared that he wouldn't be allowed to see his dad again if I offended his mother at an extreme level. However, he also stuck to the fact that this was just a family drama and he didn't want to get involved in this. But I had been putting up with Karen and Sandra's behavior for months and had stayed quiet for so long, that I was not willing to do it anymore. After a lot of arguing and shouting, we came to the conclusion that I could just sit out the next couple of family gatherings. He would cover for me and make some excuses like maybe I was too busy to show up. Of course, that would only fuel their hatred against me and give them something more to talk about, but that was a risk that I was willing to take. So after the discussion, we decided on a common conclusion that worked for both of us and we went through with it. For the past couple of months, I have not attended a single family event and it's been pretty great. Frank and I never really had any problems as such apart from the equation with his mother, and since I was not attending any events or gatherings, we had pretty much forgotten about all of it. But then recently, came back home a couple of weeks ago and he told me that his parents were celebrating their 35th marriage anniversary and they had specifically asked for me to be present because if I didn't show up at such an important event then it would reflect poorly on the family. Apparently, Karen was even ready to speak to me in person if that's what it took to make me attend. I was a little surprised that they wanted me there, but I decided to go anyway because I thought that if they were trying to make things right with me then I would be willing to give them a chance. And the fact that Karen had specifically requested for me to attend seemed like a nice gesture because I'm the kind of person who likes to see the good in everybody and it didn't set off any alarms for me. So I told Frank that I would attend the party with him, and when Frank confirmed it, Karen even reached out to me personally via text and thanked me for agreeing to attend. I thought that it was really sweet, and I believed that things were finally going to change for the better now. Of course they didn't. I was a fool to ever even think that. A few days ago, I attended the anniversary party with Frank, and a lot of people had been invited. All of Frank's family was there and even some of his friends were present. Quite unsurprisingly, even Sandra was present. Karen and Sandra were exceptionally nice to me and welcomed me to the party quite happily. For a while, everything was going well and Frank and I were socializing. We were there for about an hour and at one point, I think Frank and I were speaking to one of his aunts. Out of nowhere, Karen and Sandra came around and joined the conversation, and I didn't have a problem with it. But then, for no reason, Karen started talking about how she wished that everybody could have a story like she and her husband did. She mentioned that the two of them were childhood sweethearts and grew up as neighbors. They got married as soon as they were old enough legally, and even though this was only the 35th marriage anniversary, in her head, she had been married to her husband for way longer. I thought that was a great story, until she started talking about how she had wished the same thing for her son as well, and had almost thought that it would happen when he married Sandra. I was really taken aback by that statement because I absolutely did not see that coming. One minute she was talking about her own life and her story with her husband, and out of nowhere, she hit us with that. I realized in that moment that all of this had been an act and her real intention had been to humiliate me. Because when she had started narrating the story of how she and her husband had met, everybody had left the conversation and was paying attention to it, because everyone else, just like me, had assumed that this was going to be a sweet little anecdote on their wedding anniversary. But of course, not. She had to make it about her favorite girl, Sandra, somehow. She didn't even look at me when she was talking about how much she wished that Frank had stuck it out with Sandra, instead of just leaving and getting a divorce when they hit a snag. Sandra took up the opportunity to say that she was still willing to work things out with him. She knew that I was just a rebound and he was actually still in love with her. He looked just as blindsided as I felt and I just couldn't take it anymore. So I started screaming at them and told them to back off because they were literally insane and there was no way that I was going to take this. I called them all a bunch of spineless cowards and said that I was done putting up with their frankly psychotic behavior. I called my mother-in-law crazy and said that she needed to get herself checked because it was very obvious that she had deep-seated mental issues and she needed to be committed to an institution, because, in my opinion, she was beyond help, and if she really loved Sandra so much, she should have just adopted her. As for Sandra, I told her that she was literally the most pathetic and vile creature I had ever had the misfortune of coming across in my life. And I guess I should have just left it at that, but I also just had to say something to my father-in-law. I told him that I respected him and I really appreciated the fact that he didn't treat me the way his wife did, but he should think about the kind of person he has been married to, because even though she takes care of him, she's pretty much a monster otherwise. And then I stormed out of the party without Frank. I was so annoyed that I didn't even want to look back and check if he was following. I honestly didn't care if he was coming with me or not, because at that moment, I only cared about myself and getting the heck out of there. Shockingly enough, he didn't come back home with me, and I had to take a cab by myself. He only came back about half an hour after I was home. And when I confronted him about what the heck he was up to for so long, he snapped at me and told me that he was cleaning up the mess that I had made. He told me that he had to apologize, not only to his parents but to all the guests that were present there because of my outburst. He said that I had taken things way too far and that I owed everybody a huge apology as well. He told me that the way that I had behaved at the party was simply unacceptable and the things that I had said were straight up insane. Apparently, he believed that I should have saved it for another day instead of ruining their anniversary party and having a breakdown in front of so many guests. So we got into a massive fight because I thought that it was really unfair of him to pin the blame on me when this whole mess would have been avoided if he just had the courage to confront his mother and tell her to shut up. Instead, he had allowed Karen and Sandra to hang on me and bully me for the past 3 years. And all that was just because he didn't want to get involved in family drama, even if my honor was at stake. I thought that it was ridiculous of him and, quite frankly, very selfish. So I told him that he was being a horrible husband right now, and that's how the fight escalated. We haven't been speaking to each other for the past couple of days and it's been awful. I don't feel like I need to apologize, but I do feel bad about this whole situation. Because apart from the weird situation with his parents, Frank and I have always gotten along really well and I do love him. And I know for a fact that he loves me as well, but he just has a hard time speaking up against his family because of his father. I really want to fix this, but I don't think that I need to apologize for the things that I said. Yes, I might have taken it way too far, but I think that this was long overdue. The way that Karen and Sandra had been trying to mentally harass me for the past few years just got to me and I couldn't control my emotions anymore. And I don't see anything wrong with it because I think I was way more patient than most other people would have been in my place. Nonetheless, I want to make sure that I'm in the right here. So Ida, for insulting my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, and my husband's ex-wife in front of his entire family at her anniversary party? Update 1. Okay, so I know a lot of you might not be happy about this, but I don't care. I just wanted to make my marriage work. So instead of bottling my feelings up, I decided to talk to Frank, because I didn't want to break up. I didn't apologize to him, but last evening, after we came back home from work, I said that I wanted to talk to him. And to my surprise, he didn't even reply to it before he walked over to me and gave me a hug that lasted for almost 5 minutes. He told me that he had missed me, and before I even had the opportunity to say anything, he said that he was sorry for the way that he behaved. He said that he had been an idiot and that he was just embarrassed that day, which is why he had reacted like a fool, instead of comforting me and trying to show me that he was on my side. He told me that, after our fight, he had been sleeping on the couch and he had called Karen one night and told her off. He told me that he had decided to cut ties with his family, including his father, because on the day that I had my outburst at their house, his father had taken Karen's side. So he told me that he was done with all of them. And this is it, it's just us now. I'm actually really happy and relieved because I thought that I would have to have a difficult discussion with him, but he made it so much easier for me to deal with everything. I'm truly grateful. Grateful that I have such a good man as my husband, but nevertheless, we're still going to go for marriage counseling because we don't want to bottle things up and have them come out in unhealthy ways like this anymore. So thank you for all the advice and everything. I'm thankful for all of it, and I'm even more grateful that my husband and I are going to fix this. Update 2. Hi. So I just thought that I would let you guys know that marriage counseling has been going well. It's been a couple of months and we have had absolutely no contact with his family. It was a little rough for him in the beginning, but he had to come to terms with the fact that they were all toxic. And every day, we're getting better. Update 3. It's been a long time, but I'm back with great news, and Frank and I are really happy to inform everyone that I'm pregnant. It's been a few weeks and it still feels surreal. We haven't announced it to anybody yet, and we are trying to keep it under wraps because I know for a fact that Frank's family will be hounding us to reestablish contact once again if we announce this. And we want some time away from the drama before the inevitable confrontation. But right now, it's just me, Frank, and the baby, and I have never been happier in my entire life. I'm glad that I chose to work things out. It might not be the best way for everyone else, but for me, it really worked. Karen and Sandra really screwed themselves out of this one because Frank is pretty much the best person I have ever met, and I really can't imagine spending my life with anyone else.